So welcome everyone to our first session in our week-long webinar on Islamic socialism in the Global South. Today we will be starting with a focus on Turkey, and my name is Simon Wolfgang Fuchs. I teach Islamic studies at the University of Freiburg, and together with my colleague Layli Uddin, we have organized this series for this week. Let me briefly introduce our three speakers that we'll have today. First will be Melvyn Ingleby, who is a correspondent for the Middle East correspondent for the Dutch newspaper NRC, and at the same time also a PhD candidate in political science at the University Aix-Marseille, and he's focusing on the Islamic left in Turkey. The second speaker is İhsan Eliaçık, a public intellectual activist and one of the founding figures of the Islamic left in Turkey, actually, who has been in this business or in this line of work for a long period of time, and also has risen to prominence in Turkey on various occasions. Melvyn will also introduce him with all due respect later on. The third speaker today is Mustafa Emin Büyükcoşkun, who currently resides in Karlsruhe in Germany. He is also an activist and also a video campaigner, and has studied sociology at Bogazici University in Istanbul, and he has been an active member of the Labor and Justice platform in Turkey since 2012. And last but not least, we also have a great translator today, whose name is Freiburg, who is a third-year linguistics student at Bogazici University, who will help us to smoothen the process and who will translate your questions later on to İhsan Eliaçık, and also keep him informed of the discussion and translate his comments that we'll have. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to Melvyn, who will kick us off for this first session.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Layli, as well. Thank you both for organizing this conference, which I think is exciting. And I can see some familiar faces already popping up on the screen, so that's exciting as well. Really, I want to keep it very brief, my part, because I think it will be a lot more interesting to listen to what İhsan and Mustafa have to say. But I am currently, as Simon mentioned, a PhD student working on the Islamic left in Turkey, aside from my work as a journalist. But I've written my master thesis largely on İhsan Eliaçık and also the activist groups around him. So what I wanted to do is just give a little bit of history on the Islamic left in Turkey and some background to both İhsan and Mustafa, and maybe basically raise some questions of what the case of the Turkish Islamic left tells us about their place in Islamic politics in Turkey and beyond. But let's start with this objection that probably is well known to most of you who are interested in this theme, is that there is no such thing as Islamic socialism, right? And that Islam and socialism are, in a sense, opposites, and that the people who identify with either of the two usually hate each other in most kind of like political traditions across the Muslim world. This is really an objection that I've heard a lot as well when I tell my Turkish friends I'm working on the Islamic left. They go like, okay, there's no such thing. I think one way of understanding this reaction is approaching this topic historically, and to see that this reaction is not inevitable, but the result in Turkey and beyond as well of let's say, two clear historical conditions and factors. One is the legacy of Kemalism in Turkey, and more broadly speaking, the history of authoritarian modernization in many other parts of the Muslim world. And the second is the legacy of the Cold War. So in Turkey, the left has always kind of been, in one way or another, tied to the Kemalist legacy. Even the parts of the radical left that criticized the project of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and the authoritarian secularization and modernization of Turkey, even the most radical leftists still have long seen progress, first and foremost, in terms of identity rather than in terms of socioeconomic struggles. The Turkish left has had a very poor labor movement, been very poor in terms of, with some exceptions in the 60s and 70s, etc. But like overall, being on the left in Turkey has long been regarded with claiming a secular identity and looking like a leftist rather than acting like a leftist. And this has excluded actually a lot of the religiously conservative sides from the working class, which these same leftists claim to represent. So that's problem one, and a problem that still persists. The second problem is that from the Islamic political movement, the moment when they were actually articulating a protest against the capitalist establishment was also the moment when we were at the height of the Cold War. So in the 50s and the 60s, when slowly these forms of Islamic politics were coming up, the mainstream was totally defined by this violently anti-communist rhetoric and a very pro-statist and nationalist conservative rhetoric. So there was very little space within that. Of course, the Islamic political movement in Turkey, like elsewhere, has been defined by its anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, etc. However, you could not openly identify with the leftists, right? Because that was very much not done in a time where everyone was panicking about communism. Now, there were some exceptions to this, and İhsan Eliaçık is one of these exceptions. He is born in 1961, and in the late 70s, he was in his late teens, and he was a member of a youth group called the Akıncılar, which was a kind of more radical Islamist youth group, the mainstream of which was still very much kind of nationalist and on the right politically. But there were, in the fringes of these youth groups, people who were very curious about interaction with leftists. And there's some indication of that into which I won't go in now. But basically, these people were called mockingly watermelons by some of their contemporaries. They were green on the outside, but red on the inside. They had a much more radical narrative when it came to achieving socioeconomic change. Now, the Iranian Revolution really was a huge moment of inspiration for these people, these kind of fringes of the Islamic movement. But many of them got jailed when the 1980 military coup happened. Eliaçık got imprisoned as well, but it was in prison that it only got worse, from the perspective of the authorities, because that's when he started meeting the radical leftists in prison and basically exchanging notes, right? So he was explaining Shariati to them, and he was learning about Marxist theory from the other people in the prison. He was released from prison after a year and kind of came out as a somewhat angry, disillusioned young man in his early 20s, started studies but didn't pursue them, and basically became active as a political activist. Always on the fringes of the Islamic movement, never part of the mainstream of the Islamic political movement that was electorally gaining ground in the late 80s and especially in the 90s. But Eliaçık started writing books mostly. From the 90s onwards, he started publishing titles such as Islam ve Sosyal Değişim, Islam and Social Change, or Devrimci Islam, Revolutionary Islam. And his reputation was slowly growing. And then we have a period in Turkish politics after the 97 so-called postmodern coup, where Refah Partisi, let's say the mainstream Islamist or Islamic political party at the time, was ousted by the Kemalist establishment. And it was a period of a couple of years of intense debate within the Islamic movement, like, okay, so what are we going to do now? And the AKP of Erdogan and his companions was basically the pragmatic answer to that question. We're going to work alongside with the system to a certain extent. So it entailed, if we want to go really short, it entailed a kind of neoliberalization of the Islamic political movement. So on the one hand, they did embrace, they clearly voiced a rejection of the Islamist tradition, the AKP. But on the other hand, they also, economically, right, they embraced a new political project of privatization and neoliberalization of the economy. People like İhsan Eliaçık were somewhat positive to the first development, In this sense, I think the Islamic left in Turkey fits in post-Islamism to a certain degree. Post-Islamism, in the sense defined by Asif Bayat, as a kind of a rejection of Islamism out of a kind of fatigue that it doesn't quite work and we're not getting to power and we're starting to embrace democracy and some extent of constitutional order and secularism and a discourse on human rights. That's all present in the early AKP as well as in the Islamic left. But what the Islamic left rejects is the economic liberalism that basically went alongside with this post-Islamist turn. And I think often when we talk about post-Islamism, we basically equate it to Islamic liberalism. And the Islamic left is, in a way, a more radical interpretation of what a post-Islamist turn can mean. And it returns to some of the earlier authors, like Shariati, to retrieve the fact that their radicalism was not only something that we had to get rid of to not be Islamist, but also ingrained a promise of socioeconomic justice and a systemic critique of the type of economic policies that these new parties were putting into practice. So people like Eliaçık in the 2000s, they were starting to write a lot more about political economy. In a way, I think the coming to power of a Muslim party is nearly a condition for the formation of an Islamic left, because it is only when a Muslim party comes to power that this shift from identity to political economy can take place. Because previously, the Islamic radicals in Turkey, they were claiming their identity against the secularists, against the secular establishment. But now that AKP is in power and that Erdogan is in power, claiming your Islamic identity loses its radical value, right? You need to position yourself on matters of political economy. Previously, the Islamists in Turkey famously said, Nesa neso Islam tek yol. We're neither right nor left, but Islam is the only way. But now they're slowly starting to see that they have to position themselves. And that's why we see that in Eliaçık's works, there's a turn to these themes of political economy. And this gained a further impulse, this nascent Islamic leftist movement, because of the Arab uprisings. So in 2010, 11, we really see a lot of grassroots activist groups like Emek ve Adalet being formed, in which Mustafa was active, and we will hear a lot more about it later. And it came to a height in 2013 during the Gezi protests, in which people were very much surprised that these Islamic political actors were coming to the Gezi Park protests, which, by the government were seen as a Kemalist secular protest against their government. But the Islamic leftists were forming the exception, which was kind of debunking that narrative of identitary polarization on which the AKP very much relies, because they show that Muslims too can criticize this type of Islamic politics or supposed Islamic politics put into practice by the AKP. I think I'll cut myself short here, and I think we should, as soon as possible, listen to what both İhsan and Mustafa have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Melvyn. This was great and a great introduction to all of us who are not so familiar maybe with the Turkish case. And we would now like to ask İhsan Eliaçık to join us in the discussion. I think you just have to unmute yourself, if this would be possible. Or Farouk, maybe you can help out. Right.
Merhaba herkese.
Yeah, okay.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Beni bu konferansa davet ettiğiniz için herkese sevgilerimi ve saygılarımı sunuyorum.
Thanks to everyone for inviting me to this conference, and thank you for attending it.
İslamic sosyalizm, İslami sosyalizm fikri her ne kadar bu kelime kullanılmazsa da değişik şekillerde şu ana kadar benim karşılaştığım birçok ülkede kullanılıyor.
Though Islamic socialism is not a phrase that is used very often, I encounter it everywhere I go in Islamic countries and stuff.
Mesela İran'da Ali Şeriati Allah Perest Sosyalistler Cemiyeti kurmuştu. 70'li yıllarda.
For example, in Iran, there was a party that was founded that was called a Socialist Party in the 70s.
Yine 80'li yıllarda Mısır'da Hasan Hanefi İslami Sol diye dergi çıkarmıştı.
And in the 80s in Egypt, a person called Hassan Alefi was writing in a newspaper that was called Socialist.
Keza Türkiye'de Nurettin Topçu Müslüman Anadolu Sosyalizminden bahsetmişti.
And in Turkey, Nurettin Topçu was talking about Muslim Anatolian socialism.
Biz de ben de 2013 yılında Sosyal İslam diye kitap çıkardım.
And I wrote a book that was called Social Islam in 2013.
Bunlar bugün konuştuğumuz İslami sosyalizm fikrinin değişik şekillerdeki ifadeleri olarak görülebilir.
These can be seen as different approaches to what we are discussing today and Islamic socialism.
Sorulara mı geçiyoruz?
Yeah. So we have some questions prepared for our Hoca.
Evet.
And our first question is, from 70s to today, what are the sources and routes that got you closer to an Islamic socialism idea? Hocam, 70'lerden bugüne İslami bir sosyalizm fikrine sizi yakınlaştıran kaynak ve rotalar neler oldu?
70'lerde ilk gençlik yıllarımı yaşadım. O zaman sağ, sol ve İslamcılar diye 3 akım vardı.
In 70s, when I was young, there were three groups that were called leftists, rightists, and Islamists.
Biz İslamcılar içerisinde yer alıyorduk.
We were the Islamist part.
Bu nedenle 12 Eylül 1980 yılında Mamak cezaevinde 1 yıl yattım.
Because of this, in the coup after the September 12, 1980, I was imprisoned in Mamak military prison for 1 year.
Cezaevinde solcularla karşılaştım, tanıştım. Aynı hücrede, hatta aynı yatakta yattıklarımız oldu.
I encountered with the leftists in the prison, and I shared my cell and even at some point my bed with those people.
Biz İslamcı gençlerdik. Onlar da sol, sosyalist, Marksist örgütlerden gruplardı. Orada 1 yıl beraber geçirdik ve Türkiye solcularıyla ilk karşılaşmam orada oldu. O zaman 19 yaşındaydım.
We were the Islamic people and they were the leftist part of Turkey. And that was my first encounter with the leftist people from Turkey in prison, and I was 19 at the time.
İran İslam devrimi yeni olmuştu. 1979 yılında Ali Şeriatı'nın kitapları çevrilmişti. İlk okuduğumuz kitaplar onlardı. Ali Şeriatı'da da İslami sosyalizm fikrini açıkça gördüm.
These were the times of the Iranian Revolution and the Ali Shariati. And in 79 and 80s, we were first encountered with the works of Ali Shariati. His books were translated to Turkish, and these were the first books I have ever read.
Yine Seyyid Kutub'un İslam'da Sosyal Adalet ve İslam Kapitalizm Çatışması kitapları da ilk okuduğum kitaplar arasındaydı.
The books by Seyyid Kutub that were called Social Justice in Islam, and his other books were the few first books I've ever read.
Öte yandan dindar bir ailede büyüdüm. Din fikri çocukluğumdan beri zihnimde, kalbimde yer etmişti.
I was brought up by a religious parents, and the notion of religion was in my mind and in my heart when I was a little boy from the time.
Diğer taraftan en çok kafamda soru işareti oluşturan ve zihnimi meşgul eden şey, toplumda neden bir zengin yoksul ayrımı, çelişkisi olduğu idi.
But one of the most important things that were bugging my mind was the rich and poor struggle in the society, and why there were such differences, and why some people were so rich and the other people were so poor.
Babam dindar bir insandı, annem de öyle. Orta halli bir memur idiler. Çok yoksul bir ailede büyümedim ama çok da zenginlik görmedim. Orta halliydi ama sürekli toplumda fakirler ve yoksullar niye var diye soruyordum çocukluk yıllarından itibaren.
I was brought up in a religious and a middle class family. We were neither too rich nor too poor, but I was always thinking about the struggles of the poor, and I was bugging my mind out about the struggles they were encountering, and why were there some troubles they were encountering.
Dolayısıyla ilk gençlik yıllarımdan itibaren, ergenliğe ulaştığımdan itibaren zihnimde, kalbimde, beynimde, kafamda meşgul olan iki ana konu vardı. Birisi din, İslamiyet, öbürü de bu zenginlik, yoksulluk, bu neden olduğu meselesi.
So since I was a teenager, there were two thoughts in my mind. The first was the religious part of me, and the second was about the economic struggles and the struggle between the rich and the poor.
Bulunduğumuz ortamda şöyle bir manzarayla karşılaştık. Zenginlik, yoksulluk meselesini kendisine dava edinenlere solcular deniyordu, sosyalistler deniyordu.
The people that were interested in the class struggles and the economic struggles were called leftists. Those people who wanted to give poor people better chances, and the activists about the process were called socialists and leftists.
Bunlara karşı çıkan ve kendilerine ülkücüler diyen sağcı gruplar da ya Allah, Bismillah, Allahu Ekber diye bağırarak bunlara saldırıyordu.
And the people calling themselves rightists were attacking these people, just yelling Bismillah and Allah, and there was a clash between them.
Ben bunu bir türlü bağdaştıramıyordum ve şaşkınlıkla karşılıyordum. Nasıl orada bu ikisi birbiriyle bu şekilde karşı karşıya getirilir, birbirinin düşmanıymış gibi görülür diye.
And I couldn't wrap my head around that, because I couldn't understand why these two parties were against each other, that they were seeing each other as enemies rather than friends.
Bunu bir türlü kabullenemedim.
And I couldn't accept that.
Çünkü evimizde mesela çocukken gördüğüm şöyle bir şey vardı. Sofrada yemek yerken annem ekmek yere düştüğünde onu öper ve yukarı bir yere koyardı.
Because what I saw was when we were eating dinner at our table and a piece of bread fell to the ground, my mother picked it up, kissed it, and put it up in a high place.
Bir de Kur'an-ı Kerim yere düştüğü zaman onu alır yüksek bir yere koyardı. Ve bu ikisi belden aşağı düşmez, yerde olmaz derdi.
And the other thing she picked it up when it fell to the ground was Quran. And she said, bread and Quran cannot be on the ground, but they have to be in a higher place.
Bu benim zihnimde bayağı yer etmiş olmalı ki yıllar sonra, yani 40 yıl sonra Fatih Camii'nden çıkıp 1 Mayıs'a ilk kez Türkiye tarihinde dini bir grup camiden çıkıp 1 Mayıs gösterilerine katıldığında ana sloganımız ne olsun diye gençler sormuşlardı. Orada ben bunu teklif etmiştim. Allah, ekmek ve özgürlük.
When we first attempted the 1st of May protests, and we were the first rightist and Islamic group to attend these protests in Turkey. The young people and I were thinking about the slogan that we were trying to raise, and I come up with the idea that Allah, bread, and equality.
Şu anda da din ve sınıf meselesi benim zihnimin iki ana konusudur ve ayrılmaz parçasıdır. Bu ikisiyle zihnim meşguldür. Dolayısıyla soruda sorulan bu işin kaynakları nereye dayanıyor sorusunu bu şekilde cevaplandırmış olan.
And the prominent two ideas in my head right now is Islam and class struggles, and this is the base of my ideas and the route that I took for the Islamic socialist idea. And hocam, we are on to our second question, which is, what can you say about the movements and events besides sources and intellectuals? What have been the reasons for your introduction and interest in Marxism? Hocam, entelektüellerin ve kaynakların yanı sıra olay ve hareketlere dair ne söyleyebilirdiniz? Marksizmle tanışmanız, ilgi göstermeniz, kafa yormanız hangi vesileyle oldu?
Biraz evvel anlatmaya çalıştım. Okuduğum kitaplar, çocukluğumda zihnim meşgul eden ana çocuksu sorular, 7 yaşın filozof soruları vardı her çocukta. Benim zihnimde de böyle şeyler hep meşgul oluyordu. Sonra annemden babamdan gördüğüm Allah'a, ekmeğe saygı, emeğe saygı oluyor aynı zamanda. Bunlar benim zihnimi şekillendirmiş. Ben daha sonra kendi geçmişim üzerine düşündüğümde bunları gördüm.
From the first time that, as I said, from the first books I read to the questions I had in my mind about class and economic struggles and the clash between poor and rich they have appeared in my mind, and the respect I saw from my parents to the struggle and the bread and via bread to the production process and stuff, these questions and these problems took place in my mind. And when I reflected on my past after my teenager years, I saw that these were the things that caused my interest in the subject. So our third question is it possible to paraphrase Quran in a property and class axis? When such an interpretation goes beyond synthesis, what kind of a role do you think it'll play on subjects such as freedom, equality, and justice? Hocam, Kur'an'ın mülk ve sınıf ekseninde bir tefsiri mümkün mü? Böyle bir okumanın sentetizmin ötesine geçtiğinde özgürlük, eşitlik ve adalet mücadelesinde nasıl bir rol oynayacağını düşünüyorsunuz?
Kur'an'ın mülk ve sınıf ekseninde tefsiri mümkündür.
The paraphrasing and purview of Quran on an axis of class and property is possible.
Mümkün olmaktan da öte ben bunu bizatihi yaptım. 10 yıl uğraşarak Kur'an-ı Kerim'in mülk ve sınıf ekseninde tefsirini yazdım.
And spending 10 years, I wrote a purview of the Quran on this axis.
2007 yılında çıktı. Adı Yaşayan Kur'an, Türkçe Meal Tefsir.
It was published in 2007 and it was called The Living Quran, Paraphrasing and Purview.
Burada temel yaklaşım şuydu. Sentetizmden ziyade sınıf meselesinin alttakilerin, ezilenlerin yanında durma olayının Kur'an'ın bizatihi içeriğinde var olduğudur. Ben bunu göstermeye çalıştım.
Rather than synthesis, the thing I wanted to show was Quran in itself reflects on subject as society and class struggles and stuff, and there is no need for a synthesis on that matter.
Bu nedenle Sosyal İslam adlı bir kitap yazdım.
And for that, I wrote a book called Social Islam.
Biz sosyalist İslam değil, sosyal İslam diyoruz.
We are calling it Social Islam and not Socialist Islam.
Sosyal İslam kitabında 40 tane makale var.
There are 40 writings on the book, 40 articles.
Mesela bunlardan bazılarının başlığı neyi göstermeye çalıştığımız konusunda bir fikir verecektir.
And the articles will show about the things we wanted to show you and tell you about.
Bu makalelerden bir tanesi Kur'an'da hayır sesleri.
One of them is called the no noises in Quran.
Bu makalede Kur'an'ın nüzul sırasına göre, iniş sırasına göre ilk olarak nelere hayır dediğini göstermeye çalışıyorum.
In this article, the thing that I want to show first is what Quran says no to.
Bunun da zenginlik ve yoksulluk meselesi etrafında dönen sınıf konusu olduğunu gösteriyorum.
And the thing I stress about this is the thing Quran says no first to is the struggles between rich and poor.
Mesela diğer bir makale Kur'an'da sosyal sınıflar, üsttekiler ve alttakiler.
Another thing, another article I wrote is the class struggles and the people who are up and down in the society.
Kur'an'daki 22 sınıf kavramını inceliyorum.
I am reflecting and talking about the 22 different classes on Quran.
Mesela zengin, yoksul, işçi, emek, alın teri, muhtaç, fakir, köle, müstazaflar, ezilenler gibi birçok sınıf kavramını tek tek inceleyerek sınıf meselesinin Kur'an'ın bünyesinde yer aldığını bu makalede göstermeye çalışıyorum.
I'm talking about workers, those who have possessions, women, children, bankers, slaves, etc. And I am trying to show that the class struggle and this subject is written in Quran itself.
Sonra hırsız kimdir diye başka bir makale var. Orada da Kur'an'da geçen hırsızlık ve yolsuzluk meselesinin nedenleri ve gerekçeleri, kökenleri üzerinde duruyor.
Another article I wrote was Who is the Thief? And on that article, I'm talking about the perspective of Quran to poverty and theft and the prevention of it.
Bir başka makale Kur'an'da tabiat tasvirleri. Burada da tabiat tasvirlerinin insanları Allah'a inandırmak için değil, yerlerin ve göklerin sahibinin mülkiyetinin Allah'a ait olduğunu gösterme amaçlı bu ayetlerin geldiğini gerekçeleriyle açıklıyorum.
Another article I wrote is Purviews of Nature in Quran. And what I'm stressing about on that article is why it is written in Quran and why it shows that the possession belongs to Allah and no one else. So all possessions should be split and there shouldn't be anyone who is holding it.
Kur'an'da en çok geçen kavram mülk, Allah'ındır ifadesidir. La ilahe illallah kelimesinden daha fazla geçer.
The single most used phrase in Quran is the possession is Allah's, it is even more more seen than the La ilahe illallah phrase.
Dolayısıyla bu tür makalelerle göstermeye çalıştığım şey, biz Kur'an'a dışarıdan bir yükleme yapmıyoruz. Kur'an'a sosyalizm aşılamaya çalışmıyoruz. Kur'an'ın özünde, bünyesinde, ruhunda var olan ayetlerle orta yerde olan bir durumu ifşa etmeye, insanlara göstermeye çalışıyoruz.
And what I'm trying to say about whole thing is we don't need to synthesize socialism with Quran, or we don't need to inject the socialist ideas to Quran. And the Quran itself has these concepts and socialist ideas in itself, in its base.
Buradan benim ulaştığım sonuç şu: Kur'an'ın esas mevzusu inançlar, ritüeller değildir. Çünkü Kur'an'ın muhatapları o gün müşrikler inanıyordu, namaz da kılıyordu, oruç da tutuyordu, hacca da gidiyordu. Bütün ritüelleri yerine getiriyorlardı. Kur'an'ın esas mevzusu sosyal adalettir.
And what I think is the Quran isn't about the beliefs or rituals, but it is about social justice.
Buradan bakıldığında Kur'an'ın sınıf temelinde ekonomi politik bir bakış açısıyla tefsiri tabii ki mümkündür. Ben bunu elimden geldiğince yapmaya çalıştım. Bunun da derinleştirilerek geliştirilmesi gerekiyor.
So this paraphrasing and purview of Quran in a property and class axis is possible. I tried to do it and it needs to be done more. And our fourth question is, what does Islamic socialism have to offer for women, LGBTEQ people, and ethnic minorities? Do you think it holds its relevance and its effectiveness on these matters and for these people? Hocam, İslami sosyalizm projesi kadınlara, LGBT bireylere ve etnik azınlıklara ne vaat edebilir? Bu noktalarda güncelliğini ve etkisini koruduğunu düşünüyor musunuz?
Kur'an'da alttakileri ve ezilenleri savunan bir duruş ve bakış açısı vardır.
Quran is always with the people who are the weak and poor.
Fakirler, yoksullar, zayıf bırakılmış kadınlar, çocuklar, köleler, borçlular, sokak çocukları, fuhuş yapmaya zorlananlar, pazarlarda alınıp satılanların hepsinin Kur'an'da savunulduğunu ve durumlarının iyileştirilmeye çalışıldığını görüyoruz.
We see that in Quran, the people who are weak women and children, people who are in debt, slaves, etc., are trying to be protected and saved, and we are seeing that those people's problems are trying to be solved.
Bu çizgiyi sürdürdüğümüz zaman çağımızda LGBTİ bireyler bütün ülkelerde baskı görmektedirler. Kadınlar baskı görmekte, şiddete uğramaktadırlar. Ve toplumun hakları elinden alınan birçok kesimi baskı altındadır. Doğal olarak İslami sosyal İslam'ın doğal olarak bunları tabii ki savunması gerekir, haklarını.
So by definition, LGBT people need to be protected and are welcomed in Quran, because the Quran is always trying to save these people, and the LGBT community is under pressure and stress in all the countries and cultures it's in. So by definition, Quran should be with these, and Quran should stand by these people, and Islamic socialism should stand by these people.
Şimdi vaktimiz yok. Sadece kadın hakları ve LGBT üzerinde birkaç cümle söyleyeyim.
And I want to say a few things about women's rights and LGBT community and their rights.
Kur'an'da dışlanan şey LGBTİ bireylerin cinsel tercihleri değildir.
The LGBT people are not disqualified or they are not talked back and bad on Quran, but the Lut kavmi is.
Lut kavminde anlatılan kavmin ileri gelenlerinin zorbalık yapmasıdır. Cinsel eğilimlerini zorla başkalarına dayatmaları ve onu Lut'a baskı için kullanmaları lanetleniyor.
Lut people are not practicing their sexual practices with people who are given their consent for these practices, but they are using their power. They are powerful and rich people. They are using their power to buy people or forcefully get these people to their place and just use them, and that's what Quran is against.
İnsanların cinsel eğilimleri veya yönelimleri kendilerine bırakılmalı.
People's sexual orientation should be to themselves.
Ne devlet, ne din, ne de diğer toplumsal kurumlar onların üzerinde baskı uygulamamalı.
No religion, government, or other cultural things should be a pressure on those people.
Onlar da cinsel eğilimlerini ve yönelimlerini zor kullanarak başkalarına dayatmamalı.
And they shouldn't force their orientation onto other people.
Yani Kur'an'ın meselesi zorbalıktır. Cinsel eğilimler kişilere bırakılmıştır.
Quran is talking about bullying and not sexual orientation. It is up to people themselves.
Ben Lut kıssasından ve diğer ayetler üzerinde yaptığım araştırmalardan anladığım budur.
That is what I come up with when I researched these surahs about Lut people and other surahs.
Kadın hakları meselesine gelince bu hususta Kur'an'ın kendi çağında, Mekke-Medine ortamında, kendi tarihsel koşullarında feminist bir kitap olduğunu bile söyleyebiliriz.
When talking about Quran on women's rights, we can say that in its historical process and its time and the cultural ideas around Mecca and Medina at the time, we can say that Quran is a feminist book even.
Ama bugün 14 asır önceki o talepler çağımızda yetersiz kalıyor olabilir.
But these requests from people from 14th century before may fall behind.
Ben daha çok maksadının ve ruhunun feminist olduğunu düşünüyorum.
What I'm thinking about is the thing that Quran wants to do and not the process. That's why I'm calling it a feminist book.
Feminizden kastettim de kadın haklarını savunmaktır.
And what I'm talking about the Quran being a feminist book is that it protects and tries to give rights to women.
Sanıldığın aksine Kur'an'da örneğin kadınların erkeklerin kaburga kemiğinden yaratıldığı yoktur.
There is no part in Quran that says women were created from the ribs of men.
Kadınları dövme yoktur.
There is no hitting women.
Çok eşlilik yoktur.
Having more than one wife is not in Quran.
Miras ve şahitlikle ilgili getirdiği haklar ise o döneme mahsustur. Bugün daha ilerisini söyleyebiliriz, talep edebiliriz.
We can ask for more from our time, but at the time, these were the cultural and the advantages of time that were possible.
Kadınların boşanma hakkı vardır.
Women have the right to divorce.
Bunlar sadece bu LGBTİ ve kadın meselesi ayrı bir konferansın konusudur. Bu kadar başlık şimdilik yeter.
And the LGBT people and their rights and women's rights should be another topic for another conference, and that's what I'm going to say about these topics from now. For now.
Excellent. Thanks so much, İhsan Eliaçık, and also Farouk for your great translation. I think we have covered already a lot of ground, and I'm sure this has generated many questions. I would like, as a last step, to hand over to Mustafa before we can then enter into a discussion that can involve all of us. Mustafa?
Thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everybody. And also thanks, Melvyn, Layli, and Simone as well, and also İhsan Hoca initiating this webinar. For us, it's a great pleasure also to share our historical and political experience at Turkish context. So I would like to start kind of marking some of the points also İhsan Hoca mentioned, and also base my presentation more on our practical experience on the ground in the Turkish context, especially in the working class movement on the Sunni Turkish population of Turkey. So when we talk about Islam and socialism, immediately a critique of synthesis appears. Why we need socialism, why we need Islam? Basically for us, that arises from two failures. The failure of socialism as an ideology, a failure of socialism, reading it just from a very, so to say, Enlightenment perspective, and very exclusive secularism fails to establish a relation between socialists and different religious groups. There is an answer produced for that in South America, as we know, salvation theology, inside the Catholic Church, inside the Catholicism tradition. But when we come back to the Islamic geography, the experiences are limited. But also there is a failure of Islam. Islam as a religion, Islam as a practice of life, Islam as a way of doing politics. I don't like to mention that very big meta-narrative, so to say, statements, but we can admit that Islamic intellectuals, Islamic scholars, ulama, failed to produce an answer against the rise of capitalism and its hegemony developing from the 17th century onwards. That created a huge gap in the social life, in the political life, and with the development of colonialism, the domination of the Western or Eurocentric ideologies became very prominent in the Islamic geography. So then why we still need Islamic socialism at this context? Well, departing from Turkish context, the answer we can give is that this version, this reading of socialism doesn't help us. But on the other hand, also as Muslim beings who are practicing, believing, trying to direct their life with Islamic principles, we can say that this particular reading of Islam also doesn't help us to proceed our lives as ordinary Muslim beings. I will give a very short example regarding that. Nowadays in Turkey, the most selling Quranic translation and commentary is not the very classical one written by, upon the order of Mustafa Kemal, written by Elmalılı Hamdi Yazır, which is a quite classical tafsir commentary. But the most selling one is actually quite a tiny book, quite a tiny translation of Quran made and written by Muhammad Asad, a Ukraine-born and Pakistan, so to say, practiced and died in States, a prominent Islamic intellectual in the Muslim world, formerly a Jew, who translated Quran into English, and from English it's translated to Turkish. Why it sells so much? Because in the message of the Quran, translated by Muhammad Asad, there is an attempt to give an answer to the modern Muslim being from the Quran with a contemporary perspective. That's why still in Turkey, this text, this specific translation, this specific reading sells so much. But when I come back to our context, can we really talk about an experience of Islamic socialism in Turkey? So here I would like to also give some examples from the ground we are working on, and I would like to start with this photo, which if I can manage to share with you, with the dear participants. Yeah, in the photo you see the leaders of two political parties, Necmettin Erbakan on the right hand side, the leader of the National Salvation Party, Milli Selamet Partisi, and on the left side, the leader of Republican People's Party, CHP, Bülent Ecevit, a social democratic leader. This photo was shot in 1974 in the establishment of a very interesting coalition between an Islamist and Social Democrat Party. Can we call CHP socialist? Not maybe, but at then it was a, so to say, left-wing umbrella of in the parliamentarian politics. In 74, what this coalition achieved and says to us, even though it has a very short political life, was a possibility to bring those two poles together. CHP as a social democratic party has an agenda of anti-imperialism, has an agenda on developmentalism, has an agenda on about social justice. And from the other hand, MSP has a specific focus on the liberation of Muslims in everyday life who are excluded by the Kemalist ideology and politics during the Republican period. Of course, this coalition was discussed and there was a huge controversy and it didn't long so much, but even some particular examples from the coalition protocol, which has a specific focus on establishment of cooperatives, establishment of state factories. As an engineer, Erbakan was quite obsessed with this industrial developmentalism. But on the other hand, for example, some of the, so to say, foreign politics movements, such as the so-called liberation of the Northern Cyprus as an anti-imperialist move from the Turkish territories, was the result of that politics. Even though it wouldn't last long, this photograph represents the rupture from the very dichotomic destiny of Turkish politics, or maybe the politics in Islamic world, as the dichotomy between secular and believer or right-wing or conservative or whatever you call parts of the society. So this MSP and CHP coalition was an attempt to establish a dialogue between, so to say, progressive and the conservative parts of the society, but on the other hand, two different paradigms, two different, so to say, set of values and rules. So in that sense, I found this photo quite important and also still valid for our political context. Why we need this? I think we need this photo because I'm talking about Turkish example, but it can be expanded to the Middle East and beyond, and also in South Asia for the most of the Islamic geography. This dichotomy pushes us into a like two-pole structure where also some specific contents of Turkish demography doesn't allow the establishment of the new political alliances. So if we can roughly, not avoiding from a specific reductionism, Turkish society has the three main components: Turks as the, so to say, major dominant population. Inside the Turkish population, there are also Alawites who doesn't, so to say, adopt the Sunni understanding of Islam, who are a heterodox understanding of Islam, which has some common values with the Shia world. a specific, so to say, pro-Western, relatively middle class part of the society, and the more conservative Sunni Muslim majority. Apart from that, we have Kurds, who has like circa 20 million of the whole population, who are the most prominent democratic force, and also since late 70s, actively engaging first a separatist, then a democratic autonomist movement, who is also active today in the 4 different parts of the Kurdish territories inside Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and Turkey also. So this three-pole or three-leg structure doesn't allow in Turkey to really divide society in the 2 poles easily. And when it comes back to the Sunni Turkish population, most of the time it's left to the right-wing parties to be represented, to be defended of, even though Kurds have their own party who are also alliance with the socialists. So to say, Alawites are most of the time represented with either with Kurdish party, HDP, People's Democratic Party, or GHP, the Republican People's Party. This three structure politics asks for a necessity of the Sunni Turkish working class to be organized by whom? So the establishment of the labor and justice platform actually departs from this very demographic necessity, because there is no agenda, there is no serious political agenda which really talks to the necessities, to the origins, to the specifications, to the authenticity of the Sunni Turkish population and their understanding of life, their understanding of Islam, their understanding of the world in a general perspective. The photo you are looking for is a different answer to that. It's not from any, so to say, central metropole of Turkey. It's from Tokat, a Turkish Alawi city in the, so to say, northwestern Anatolia. And this is a very small Islamist organization called Tokat, and who has also a partner organization called Free Educators Syndicate, labor union. And that's the first time in Turkey, that will be also a small correction to İhsan Hoca, an Islamist in the contemporary terms, organization has been attended to a May Day demonstration. Even though it was a very small cortege, even though it was a small city, that particular moment is very important in the Turkish political history, attempting to change the understanding of the Muslim population regarding the left, regarding the Marxist values, regarding the understanding of a working class politics, and also very important, to be in line with the others, to be in line, so-called, in a very popular way, infidels or non-believers, which has been, in a popular understanding, always been equalized with secular, Western, socialist, Marxist, or communist members of the society. So this equation, this reductionism has been, so to say, deconstructed with this attempt. So that's why it's so important in the political field what we are trying to achieve. I found the deconstruction of this autonomy, this dichotomy important, but also what are our tools to deconstruct it? Not just synthesizing Islamic understanding with class concepts, or not just translating socialist values or trying to represent them with some hadith from the Prophet or some verses from Quran is not easy. It just ends up with a form of political propaganda or a nicely done, so to say, agitation, I would rather call. So I would like to shortly, I'm also aware of our time limit. Sorry? Okay, I think there are some commentary from the public. I would like to just shortly name one of the prominent, so to say, steps in this struggle, and leave it the ground for the questions for a further discussion. For example, what we are trying to achieve in our struggle in the labor and justice platform, one of the prominent key moments for us was actually those iftar, those fast-breaking ceremonies we established in 2011. Yeah, it was 2011. It was important because it was, again, attempting to break this dichotomy, inviting and assembling the believer and non-believer parts of the society, calling a religious ritual to the public field, but not dominating public field, assembling people on a singular line, but not in a linear way, and putting the bread onto the table, leaving the bread to be shared as we defend. So we are defending, like, if I can translate our motto, a right way of production and a just way of sharing, so to say. So in the fast-breaking ceremony, which Muslims perform during the holy month of Ramadan for a month, we declared that actually the hunger unites us. The hunger also makes us equal. It's not like a jest of where rich and poor can be really equal. It's not like that. It's not that much easy, because this is actually the most important issue with the Islamic ideology. As Gilles Kepel says, that what Islamic Revolution in Iran achieved was to unite the bazaris, so to say, the shopkeepers of the Grand Bazaar of Tehran, the bourgeois, with the Kerkeram and Danishçu, and the students, so to say, the unemployed students and the working class. They are united, breaking their class roots under the flag of Islam, under the Islamic ideology, and they almost forgot their class roots. The equality we are offering here is not like that. We are actually re-establishing this break, this rupture from the Islamic perspective, and also with a particularity in the Turkic tradition coming from Central Asia till Anatolia. And the iftar ceremonies we established actually start in the famous Taksim Gezi Park in 2011, and actually we were in the park before the Gezi protests happened, and our dear Hoca İhsan also was there, and a lot of intellectuals, but also very ordinary people, the poor, the cleaning workers of the park, the homeless, so to say, the immigrant workers, the very subaltern parts of the society were together on this table. Again, it was quite actually a symbolic gesture, but we were protesting this luxury hotel iftars, which are organized by political parties, Islamic bourgeois, different companies, or also the political party which is ruling the Turkey. And this protest established the rupture inside the Islamic society and brought the notion of class. Okay, we are in front of this luxury hotel, and there is a division. Even though we believe to same Allah, even though we follow the same Quran, it looks that we have a different commentary here. We have a different reading of the holy texts, of the holy sources, of the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. So this iftar, so to say, activities brought a wide discussion, and also brought us to the attention of the public till the Gezi protests. With the Gezi protests, another rupture came to the society, which was again this fear in the Muslim population about an attempt of another coup d'etat, connecting Gezi protests with like what happened after in Tahrir Square with the Sisi coup d'etat, or other uprisings in Middle East. And serious part of the Muslim society who is supporting AKP, the Justice and Development Party, felt this fear, which they felt in '97, that the reacting to the secular phase of this uprising, reacting this very lifestyle defense in this uprising, and relatively middle class notion of this uprising, they felt a danger actually, which they shouldn't feel, and somehow we couldn't stop to change or to transform this very fear of danger of the Muslim part of the society, and that actually created a huge rupture between Muslims who adopt a more positional position inside the society, and started actually a much fundamental breaking apart of the Muslim population in Turkey, again lining the sides again, and now sourcing and centering the conflict inside the Muslim society. I would like to continue
Mustafa,
sorry, yeah.
Mustafa, sorry about this. This is all extremely interesting. Thanks for laying this out. And I'm sure you will be able to come back to some of these issues, because we have already a couple of questions that people sent in that we're also eager to address all of you. And I think I will just stop the recording at this point, so that you can also feel free to ask questions, and you don't have to worry about this being online forever. So I'm just stopping the recording now.